stau jos. Să stau jos după aia. Și tu aici, și fie vine și Olga.
More sun.
Și
more road trips. More energy. Cleaner energy. This is what we want for the future.
l-am auzit pe...
We started the transformation to lead the energy transition in Romania and Southeast Europe. We will invest to develop low and zero carbon projects, to supply energy and cleaner mobility. We will increase the share of gas in our portfolio. And we focus on current business to generate value and ensure security of supply. For our people, for our customers, for our communities.
Hello, please take your seats. We will start soon our next panel.
Sustainable future.
Hello to everyone. I'm honored to be the moderator of our next panel. It's an honor for me to be with you, and I will start presenting our distinguished guest of today, distinguished guests and speakers. As you know, our panel is Russian political warfare and threats from the North Sea to the Black Sea in partnership with Norwegian Institute for International Affairs. I have the pleasure and the honor to present you our guests. And I will start with Olga REZNIKOVA. She is a researcher, National Institute for Strategic Studies in Ukraine, author of the book National Resilience in a Changing Security Environment, also author of more than 70 scientific articles, author of reports for the President of Ukraine and government of Ukraine. Her main research focus is on national security and resilience. Next to her is Alina BÂRGânOANU. She is a well-known researcher and expert focused on disinformation, fake news, and manipulation. A well-known expert in these fields. Her latest book is Fake News, The New Arms Race, and I recommend it to all of you. This is a very, very interesting book. And online with us, unfortunately, is not physically with us today, but I'm happy to salute Jakub GODZIMIRSKI, research professor, the Norwegian Institute for Public Affairs, NUPI. He has been working on Russia foreign and security policy issues at NUPI for more than 20 years. He also works on European policy and its impact on developments in Central and Eastern Europe, including relations with Russia. Thank you very much, Mr. GODZIMIRSKI, for your presence. Just a few remarks. In a world of disinformation and manipulation, it's time to face reality. And reality is a war in Ukraine. We all say a war in Ukraine, it's a war against Ukraine. And it is not a war which started on the 24th February last year. It started much more years ago. It's a war, a full-scale invasion against Ukraine, but also it's a hybrid war which targets every one of us, everyone in this hall, we are a target in this war, and I don't know how much we have the power to resist to this war, and how much our population has the tools and the knowledge to be resilient, because the most frequent word I heard today is resilience. And unfortunately, I believe our society is unprepared for this informational war, and we will speak about this. We have our distinguished panelists to talk about. Thank you very much, and I'm giving the floor to Professor Alina BÂRGâOANU. I know you have a presentation. I know the presentation, and I have a lot of concerns regarding this result of your study. Please, Alina BÂRGâOANU.
Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for this nice introduction. Fortunately, I had the privilege to attend the latest part of the previous panel, and I think that the discussion that I managed to catch provided an excellent introduction to what I'm about to present, about hybrid warfare, about political warfare, about a thing for which we do not even have a name. So my very short presentation is entitled with a very strong statement, the first information warfare integrating offline and online realities. First of all, since I am a professor, I will make some very, very brief conceptual clarifications. And after that, unfortunately, picking up from where Ion left, I will present some results about public opinion research in Romania, which I think are a perfect example of the theoretical concepts that I will briefly present. So I'm making the point that what we are experiencing right now in terms of communication, public opinion, propaganda, persuasion, is something for which we do not have a good precedent in history. Of course, it is very important for us, people working in the field, to know the history of propaganda. We immediately recognize some tactics. We recognize whataboutism, demonization of the adversary and stuff like this. So I think that in terms of technique, everything is pretty straightforward. It is taken from old propaganda books. But I'm making the strong point, and I hope that with good arguments, that we are living in a completely changed information environment. And I try to put on the slides some things which characterize this new information environment, again, providing a scene that we haven't seen before. So we do not have, for example, the classical distinction between internal politics and external politics. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is heavily involved in internal affairs. And also the Ministry of Interior, for example, in a recent case, an example, had to assume a very strong communication role in a topic which traditionally would have been a foreign policy topic. So this is one distinction. We do not have the distinction between war and peace. I particularly like this term, unpeace. There is a book which was published before the invasion on Ukraine, which was called The Age of Unpeace, saying that we are living in a period of connectivity, hyper-connectivity wars. And the author, Mark Leonard, somehow predicted the fact that this kind of hyperconnectivity works will acquire a kinetic aspect at some point, which proved true only 2 months after the book was published. Another distinction that no longer holds has to do between real reality, let's say, and computerized reality. I made this strong point even before the ChatGPT arrived, and people look at me in a very weird way. Oh, no, we know reality. Of course, there are computers, there are algorithms, but we still know what the strong reality is. I think that now with the emergence of ChatGPT, we realize that the distinction between real reality and computerized reality again no longer holds, and I make reference to the gamification of war, to the platformization of war, ChatGPT and deepfake and stuff like this. Another distinction, which is a very recent one in terms of becoming very blurred, has to do between mainstream media and social media. up until 5 years ago, I think that we were somehow in a position to say, this is mainstream media, this is social media, we should pay attention, we need other skills in order to understand what is going on. I think that now we have marched into a post-platform society in which, again, the distinction between mainstream media, social media, private messaging platforms no longer hold. Probably this is the worst type of news for a distinguished journalist such as our moderator. But again, I think that this distinction no longer holds. Another distinction which I think is relevant for the discussion is that we can no longer make this, is the last one, we can no longer make distinctions between covert and overt influence operations from hostile state actors. I mean, no matter how proficient the intelligence industry may have become, I think that the distinctions between covert and overt influence operations rarely holds. So again, these are some of the arguments why I'm saying that this changes the information environment completely. And again, I'm making the strong points that we do not have a good precedent in history in order to deal with what is going on. Very, very briefly, I think that talking about new information warfare, I think these are some of the characteristics about this new information warfare. The concept has been on the table, of course, for a longer period of time, but I think that now it is exactly the first time when we experience it. And I think that the characteristics of the new information warfare is that this kind of information warfare is always global or transnational. Audiences are global or transnational, but of course there are localized responses. I'm not a pessimistic guy. I still think that this information hybrid warfare and the new information warfare can be defeated. The effects of this kind of new information warfare are put here on the slides. This is not only my work, but it synthesizes a lot of intellectual work that has been done in the field. When you talk about disinformation, we say, oh, but people do not believe it, so don't worry about this thing because nobody believes this crazy stuff. But the purpose of this kind of new information warfare is not necessarily to make you believe in something, but rather to create the kind of effects that you see on the slides, to create polarization, to create fatigue. I think that we can see a lot of fatigue in our Western societies, information fatigue, confusion, apathy combined with hyperactivity, so very, very contradictory public opinion things. So again, if we judge there is a tendency to look in Romania, for example, at the public opinion polls and say, okay, but people still want to be part of NATO. Of course they want to be part of NATO, but when you go deeper, you discover that a gross majority of the population says that the West, the evil West, has something against us. So again, these are contradictory public opinion results, which can be interpreted by taking a look at this kind of effects. That was the theoretical part. I know that I may be too much into the subject, but I think that this provides for some clarification. And in order to illustrate exactly what, I'm saying exactly, but in order to illustrate what I have just shown you, I will present to you the results of a very recent public opinion poll that I conducted in Romania. So this is a public opinion poll that I personally conducted, so I can testify to the validity of the results. These are very new results. The public opinion poll was done in March, and you can see here some methodological insights. And here you have an overall view about the war narratives. I put them together on one slide in order to have a snap view. And then I have some slides in order to elaborate. But I think that this is very illustrative thing about the effects of this kind of political warfare, geopolitical warfare, new information warfare on the Romanian society, which I still believe is one of the most truly pro-European and pro-NATO countries in the region. So again, there is a contradiction between my true belief that we are still a very European, pro-NATO country, and with the results that you can see here on the slides. So again, I put here the results in a snapshot. With on the other slides, you have them in order to have a clear view. So Romania should maintain its neutrality in this war. Of course, neutrality is a very, very generous concept, but how can you be neutral since you are, I mean, to give the most basic example, how can you be neutral when you are part when you are already part of a certain alliance? So neutrality really doesn't make sense. You can see here that 72.4% of the population in March 2023 in Romania considers that Romania should have a neutral stand on the war against Ukraine or the war on Ukraine. Another subject, the war in Ukraine must end as soon as possible, even at the expense of territorial concessions. So again, there is the peace narrative that I'm sure you are all familiar with. And again, I may be attacked, oh, are you against peace? But look how we formulated the question. So the question is, do you agree that peace should be attained in Ukraine at the expense of territorial concessions? So this is where the misleading content comes in. It is more than 50% of the population. Ukraine must accept Russia's terms in order to avoid the nuclear conflict. This is why I said that the previous panel provided an excellent introduction to this kind of results. I'm sure that this kind of narrative, the nuclear threat, is a global, a transnational one, just as I have explained in the previous slide. Again, I think that the results are interesting because there is a portion of the population that doesn't know how to answer to this kind of question, so it is in certain of a confusion, and also you can see some sort of polarization. Remember the slides with the effects of disinformation and political warfare. Here, again, we can stay relaxed and say, oh, look, the majority of the population still thinks whatever. But look at the narrative, the Ukrainian government is Nazi. So again, we can be relaxed that 52% of the population says that this is not true. But there is a considerable portion of the population saying that 28% that the Ukrainian regime is Nazi. And again, apology for our Ukrainian guests. The topic is the effect of Russian propaganda political warfare in a country such as Romania. This is a lot of whataboutism that was practiced, I'm sure, in all Western countries. Romania should first take care of its own citizens and then take care of the Ukrainian refugees. And of course, it is a very generous statement to say that Romania should take care of its own citizens. I mean, it is very, very naive. We don't even have to put it like this. The distortion comes in making this a binary phenomena, so you have to choose either or, and to present a black and white phenomena. And here, I think that the results of the public opinion polls are overwhelming. And also, you see the economic frame that the refugees are a burden for our society. And the last slide showing that people are confused about the sources of information. So the question was, who do you think that spreads disinformation propaganda? I think that because that was a very, very big narrative during the pandemic and also during the war in Ukraine, that you cannot trust anyone, that both sides are engaged in propaganda, that both sides hide the truth. And here you see here the results of a public opinion research at the level of March 2023. For example, a considerable portion of the population, 37%, saying that NATO disinforms or spreads propaganda. Again, these are results that I can testify to. I was particularly involved in the formulation of the questions because I think it is all about the questions. If you want to ask only traditional questions, you will get very comforting results. But if you ask the hard questions, chances are that you will get the results like this. And the final point, and I will be open to discussion after I listen to the presentations of the other speakers, possible answers. I have grown a little bit tired about this kind of questions. The toolkit for fighting propaganda is very, very clear. I think that also a master's student can classify the results about the supply of propaganda, the demand for propaganda, regulation, co-regulation, literacy, whatever. But I think that this is one of the best phrases about how to fight this kind of new phenomena, a phrase which was put forward before, long before the war against Ukraine. Ukraine, saying that this is not about fighting some bots, this is not about giving people more facts or better facts, but it is about treating the ecosystem just like we treat the financial system. When you treat the ecosystem, the information ecosystem like the financial system, it means that you have to have institutions, you have to have regulation, and you do not argue with people all the time, why do you buy fake currency? Because it is not their responsibility to make the differentiation between what is fake currency and what is legitimate currency. Thank you very much. I will stop here, and I will leave the floor for the other speakers.
Thank you very much. Alina, BÂRGâOANU, a very provocative study, and we can see the concrete results of Russian propaganda and narratives. A population is not prepared to make the difference between truth and fake. I'm going further because we do not have much time, and I want to listen the next presentation. Please, Olga REZNIKOVA.
Distinguished guests, dear colleagues and friends, I'm grateful to be participating in this very important event in the field of regional security. I thank to the New Strategy Center for this opportunity. I would like to focus your attention on a wider spectrum of Russia's threats, in addition to a great presentation by Alina on information threats in this sphere. Speaking about Russia's political warfare and the effectiveness of its means, I would like to divide this issue into two periods, before Russian invasion of Ukraine and now. Russia began to test the strength of the world order and find its vulnerabilities a long time ago. The weak reaction of the United Nations and other international organizations, as well as many nations, to Russia's war against Georgia in 2008 and the occupation of the part of Ukraine, including Crimea, in 2014, encouraged the aggressor to expand its imperial ambitions. Russia was quite successful in its hybrid warfare. The Russians created a new reality not only for their population, but managed to form a network of sympathizers and convince many influential people around the world that the neighboring states completely belong to Russia and it has the right to aggression against their neighbors to achieve its political goals. To do this, Russia used disinformation, cyber attacks, bribery, Novichok poison to destroy its opponents, sabotage, business and energy as weapons, and so on. Now, they have gone forward. In addition to non-military means, Russia tests air defense systems of some European countries and finds NATO's vulnerabilities. Russian means in Ukraine are unlimited. Their aggression and annexation, occupation and deportation, mass murder, bombing city, torture, etc. Other Russian threats are focused on shaking the unity of the EU and NATO. Not every one of their members assessed Russia as a threat before February 24, 2022. Some of allies didn't want to abandon business with Russia in favor of maintaining peace and security in the European region. That is why we observed a certain confusion and indecision in the world community in the first days of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Our decisiveness to fight unprovoked and unfair Russian military aggression and defend our sovereignty against an overwhelming enemy forces has changed many things in the world. This forced many people to remember true democratic values, the value of human life, fairness and justice, freedom, the state's right to self-defense, the principles of inviolability of borders and the inevitability of punishment for crimes. The large-scale Russian aggression against Ukraine demonstrated the striking weaknesses of most international security organizations and the lack of effective international mechanisms to prevent or end the war at an early stage. The deep concern of the UN is clearly not enough to provide peace and security in the war-torn region. Russia's presidency of the UN Security Council in April of this year looked like a bad joke when an aggressor can head a main international security body. I would like to emphasize several very dangerous trends which are developing in the global security environment currently. First is proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and conventional weapon systems. Witnessing the escalation of threats, sovereign states see the way forward in strengthening their own security and defense capabilities. One more reason for that is bad example of Ukraine, which once had renounced nuclear weapons in exchange for international security assurance, but in fact for nothing. Neither their Budapest Memorandum nor their international order protected Ukraine from Russian invasion. Second is Russian endless war. Russia is already preparing the ground for further aggression against Ukraine and other states. They are rewriting history textbooks and creating a new history where Ukraine, the Baltic and Central Asian countries never existed as sovereign states. Russians teach their youth and the youth in the occupied territories of Ukraine to be at war, not at peace. They are not interested in sustainable development and cooperation with neighboring countries. They are interested in the endless war. This leads me to several conclusions. First, nowadays, peace is a short period between wars. To my mind, some prosperous countries fall into the illusion of endless peace. Some politicians believe that the war can happen somewhere in other countries, for example, in Ukraine, Georgia, Syria, but not in their countries. This is a big mistake. Currently, war is everywhere, but its manifestations in different countries are different. Second, the unity of the EU and NATO in supporting Ukraine in its current struggle for existence is crucial for maintaining peace and democracy in Europe. Several European countries were members of the former Soviet Union. They understand Russia's strategic culture better than others. They are better aware of Russian threats. At the same time, there are some politicians and experts in the EU and NATO that are still thinking about business as usual with Russia and looking for a compromise. I'm afraid they do not realize that even if Ukraine is sacrificed, Russia will not stop there. It will be only a break to gather strength for a new aggression. The practice of consensus-based decision-making seems questionable in today's environment. For example, if 30 member states want to adopt a decision and one is against, the decision will not be adopted. In fact, it will correspond to the interests of only one member state and contradict the interests of 30 other states. It is not just that it looks awkward. Under the ongoing war conditions, it makes it easier for Russia to influence the decision-making process in some international organizations. It is enough to persuade one of the country to vote against the decision which is unfavorable for Russia. Third is, the war fatigue is very dangerous. We observed this after 2014 when Russia occupied the part of Ukraine. Currently, attempts to restore Russia's participation in the activities of international organizations indicate that lessons from past experience have not been learned. The last example is Parliamentary Assembly of the Black Sea Economic Cooperation that took place this year in Ankara. Fourth, there is a need for a radical transformation of the United Nations, first of all, its Security Council, and the OSCE, whose international regulatory potential is stuck in the last century. However, no practical steps have yet been taken in this direction. Perhaps smaller alliances that can be created in the future will be more effective in countering modern threats. Therefore, Russian threats are diversified and very dangerous. Underestimating them would be a big mistake. That concludes my short speech. Thank you for your attention, and thanks to everyone who supports Ukraine in the darkest hour. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm going further to Jakub GODZIMIRSKI. If you hear us, please, the floor is yours. I presume we do not have sound here. Let's try again. Okay. No. I'm asking a little bit help. Professor, do you hear me?
I hear you, but do you hear me?
Yes, in this moment we hear. It's okay, please continue.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank you for being invited and involved in this very important discussion. Since we are to discuss Russia's use of political warfare, we need to understand what is the purpose of this use of political warfare, because we will not be able to understand Russian approaches to the use of political warfare if we don't understand what are the Russian political and strategic objectives. And this brings me to the question of how to understand the connection between political objectives and the means that are used in order to achieve those objectives. And political warfare is indeed a way of describing how those ideas about objectives are translated into actual strategies that are implemented to achieve those political objectives. And when talking about Russian strategic objectives, we need to see different dimensions. On the one hand, in 2023, it's obvious that for Russia, the most important objective is at the moment to win the war in Ukraine. And what Russia is doing in the field of political warfare is to serve this overall purpose. But we need to understand that the war in Ukraine is only one of the instances of the Russian aggressive behavior. This is something that we need to face in 2023, but it's also a kind of expression of Russian long-term strategic ideas about what Russia is to be and what kind of long-term objectives Russia seeks to achieve. And for instance, in 1962, a very renowned American historian Cyril Black published a book chapter in a book on the long-term Russian strategies, not only during the communist period, but also in the pre-communist era. And he somehow identified 5 long-term objectives that the Russian Empire in various disguises has tried to achieve. One is the protection of its borders, another one is gathering of what the power elite in Moscow defines as Russian territories. Another one is to present Russia as a great power that would be able to compete with other great powers, and to achieve those 2 objectives. Russia was also very much interested in creating framework conditions for positive framework conditions for economic development, and then Russia was also using its connections in various types of institutions and alliances in order to promote its long-term interests. And I think that when we look at Russia's strategic, operational and tactical objectives in 2023, we see all those elements very much still present in the Russian approach to the outside world. the annexation of Crimea is definitely an expression of this interest in gathering what the power elite in Moscow defines as Russian territories. The open, full-fledged war against Ukraine is, to a very large extent, this expression of the same ideas, but it's also, at least when Putin presented the war objectives on the 24th of February, he mentioned three main objectives. It was about denazification of Ukraine, it was about demilitarization of Ukraine, it was also about the protection of those separatist units in Donbass, but the overall kind of Russian justification of the war was that it was about protecting Russia against external influence and against external threats. So this is also very much about strengthening Russia's security. I don't subscribe to all those ideas, and we also see that from the Russian perspective there is also hierarchy of interests, and Russia was willing to somehow offer the positive economic development when dealing with those issues. But Russia has also been using its position in international organizations like the permanent seat in the Security Council as a very important instrument. And if we understand what Russia wants to achieve, then it would be much easier for us to identify what kind of instruments Russia has at its disposal and how Russia combines those instruments in order to pursue its policies and in an attempt at achieving those long-term strategic goals. In general terms, in the Western and also in the Russian debate, we quite often think about four types of instruments states have at their disposal in order to achieve their strategic objectives. In the strategic American parlance, you'll find the concept of DIME. DIME stands for diplomatic, informational, military, and economic measures. And those are the most important instruments of power any state, not only Russia, but also other states can use in order to pursue their goals. In the case of Russia, we see that Russia has combined various instruments of power prior to the launching of the full-fledged war against Ukraine in February, because we saw that Russia tried not very convincingly to play the diplomatic game with the West when Russia presented those two documents that Russia wanted the United States and NATO to sign in December 2021. It was a way of trying to play the diplomatic game. We need also to remember that already in the second half of 2021, Russia tried to play the economic instrument. Russia reduced the supply of gas to the European Union, and this was also very much viewed as Russia using the economic instruments of power to influence the policies of countries in question. We understand that Russia, since at least the 1980s, tried to build a relationship with the European Union based on the idea of the European Union becoming more and more dependent on supplies of Russian energy, and this was definitely something that Russia played in the second half of 2021, which this use of economic backlash energy instruments by Russia in the second half of 2021 resulted in very high prices for energy commodities in Europe, first and foremost gas and electricity. It was expected that those skyrocketing prices would also have not only an economic but also a political effect. So this was also a very good illustration of how Russia could combine instruments of power the country has at its disposal to achieve some political objectives. And in this case, the political objective was to somehow undermine the cohesion of the West, because in Western Europe there were some countries that were much more dependent on energy supplies coming from Russia, and there were also those countries that implemented various types of measures, like Poland, to become less energy dependent on Russia. So this was also a way of an attempt at splitting Europe, and we still see this being played when we look at how Hungary is approaching Russia, how Hungary is somehow prioritizing its energy interests and its political relationship with Russia in the situation when Russia is engaged in a full-fledged war. This is a very good illustration. On the other hand, we have countries like Finland that were, until a certain moment, almost completely dependent on energy supplies coming from Russia, but have managed to implement some measures that have made them much less dependent, or even completely independent on energy supplies coming from Russia. So we see that there is a very clear use by Russia of various types of instruments to promote its long-term strategic interests. And we see also that Russia is also very actively operating in the information space. Dimensions of Russia's potential use of nuclear weapons in conflict with Ukraine, or in conflict with the West, because this war in Ukraine is increasingly being presented by Russian propaganda as Russia's war with the West. So the use of Russia threatening the West and Ukraine with use of nuclear weapons is also another illustration, because it's also a combination of what could be presented as use of military instruments, but it's also very much an information measures aimed at public, both in Russia but also international. So I think that if you want to understand...
Please try to conclude, because we do not have much time, and I want to save 2 minutes for questions.
My main idea here is that if we want to understand what is Russia's repertoire of power, by what I mean the use of various types of instruments of national power, we need really to have a good understanding of what are Russia's short, mid, and long-term strategic objectives. And I will leave here. We will still have some minutes to have a fruitful discussion. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor. We do not have much time. I have a short remark and then announce. We'll be back soon. Don't leave your seats, because it will follow a new presentation, a short study. So stay, and we'll continue with this study in a couple of minutes. It's a study, a presentation of NUPI, a new strategy center about Russia disinformation campaigns in the NATO space in the context of the war in Ukraine. So we do not have probably just 2 minutes. If you have a question, please, the floor is open for our expert, please. Two questions. Just a moment, because is the gentleman there, and after, very short, please.
Nick Thorpe from the BBC. Thank you for the presentation. Just a warning, really, as we try and have a debate about this. I think there's a danger that with, the kind of questions you're asking, Alina, that we further polarize society, and that we sort of demonize those who think differently. There's plenty of genuine desire for an end, a rapid end to this war in Europe. And if we assume everyone who wants that is a kind of Russian troll or under Russian propaganda, then I think that's very dangerous. I think we do, as we saw in the previous panel, I think it was Michael Scharfschwerter pointed out that German public opinion changed a lot in the last year. I think public opinion can change in Romania, in Hungary, where I live, other places, but we need the genuine debate and avoid demonizing people who think differently. Thanks.
Yes, I think it's needed much more to communicate with people. Please, if you have an answer.
Yeah, thank you very much for this caveat that I should have expressed in the first place. A short answer: there was no demonization of the public opinion. I mean, the results are agnostic. Let's say this is the picture of public opinion research in Romania as it is right now. And I explained when I formulated the questions that I didn't ask, do you want to be pro-war or pro-peace, because I think this is where a debate can follow. But the question reflected documented Russian narratives that we should achieve peace immediately at the expense of territorial concessions from the part of Ukraine, which is a completely different story. So, but again, I endorse your caveat. There is, in the literature, there is the concept of perception hack, to see Russian propaganda everywhere, which creates, I think, can create complacency, can legitimize this kind of adversary. So I completely endorse your comment that we shouldn't see Russian propaganda everywhere, because this again creates the perception hack. But again, I think that the questions were clearly formulated based on the research that we did on social media about Russian narratives, and by the way, narratives that circulated at a transnational level. But again, I completely agree with the idea not to see Russian propaganda everywhere, because we make it all sound like a all-powerful phenomena, which I still believe it is not.
One more question? Just a minute, okay? Any comments? Okay, please come to the panel. It is a presentation. Our guests, please. Sergiu MITRESCU, Ileana Rotaru, Jakub GODZIMIRSKI is with us. Norwegian Institute for International Affairs, NUPI. Please, you have the floor.
Distinguished guests, we are here for a rather brief but hopefully informative panel, presenting the latest policy brief co-written by New Strategy Center and the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs, titled "A Year of War, National Attitudes in Romania and Norway." The policy brief is part of a project that we're currently implementing called Flanks 2, dealing with the challenge of political warfare in the Ukraine war context, financed under the Norwegian Fund for Bilateral Relations. Given that we are rather short on time, I think we should get straight into it, and I will ask you, Elena. The results yielded a rather interesting image regarding Romania's attachment to NATO and Euro-Atlantic institutions. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Yes, first of all, I would like to put you into the same context as our previous co-panelists were talking about. So there are two studies that actually are having the same results and are concluding toward the same main trends in the Romanian public opinion, and of course now in comparison with my colleague Jakub GODZIMIRSKI. We are talking about a study that was also implemented during March 2023. So probably this is one of the reasons that our results are consisting in the same area. Now, answering to your question, Sergiu, I will try to be a little bit more optimistic about profiling, and I will start with the good parts of the results in our research. I confirm that there is a strong point towards Romanian opinion to NATO and EU institutions. So there is like 80%, I'm talking you approximately 80% of the Romanian public opinion in March 2023, because now we are coming to be much more attentive to the period when we do this kind of social research on national level. Here in New Strategy Center, we have measured during the last year in several periods these public opinion trends. So that's why I'm underlining the fact that in March 2023, again, we have a strong opinion towards EU and NATO Romanian citizens' orientation. But there is also a but. And now I will also validate some of the examples of the study that Alina BÂRGâOANU presented you earlier, which were independently. I also want to underline this. We have also observed this trend towards neutrality. A neutrality that comes of the same idea of considering that the position of 20% of the Romanian is oriented towards a point of humanitarian aid, medical assistance, and backing actually the fear that they encountered 1 year ago. In this case, even if we have, as I told you before, like 80% supporting NATO and EU institutions, 60% NATO, they are agreeing that NATO is defending us from Russia. Even that 40% of the Romanian think that we should fulfill our commitments toward NATO and the other NATO member states, we are still, and we are seeing that as a trend in the public opinion, that war fatigue that Alina explained you theoretically also earlier is coming as a new wave. And this war fatigue, we have to explain that. This war fatigue comes out on the basis of an economic issues and on the fear of the energy crisis that we have encountered during this winter period. And you assisted also earlier in this morning about the fears from Republic of Moldova representative, also from other parts of Eastern European countries that were actually connected with the dependency of the Russian energy and gas. And also the war fatigue of disinformation, and probably we'll have a little bit more time to tackle about these disinformation issues. As profiling, because we tried to do also a profile about who are the persons or what are the main points that in the Romanian public opinion are in one position or another. So even if NATO is perceived as a security net, there are two distinguished categories in public opinion that we must mention. On the one hand, we expected that actually, because as I told you before, we have previous research that tackle this particular profile, are the young people. The young people actually here is the first polarization that we can see and we can observe easily. On one hand are the young people that are employed, that have a higher education, that have a stable and above medium income, which are supporting NATO and which are supporting the Romanian state decision towards helping and supporting Ukraine for this war, but also there is another young people category until 44 years old, the one that on the one hand are the blue collar or unemployed or in that are not caught anymore in any other type of education, the needs as you probably know about. And the second large category that we saw and we observe are 45 to 59 years old women, especially from rural areas that are or in a gray color profile of employment or inactive on labor market. Probably here, regarding the women group, we have to do a deep qualitative research and probably some interviews further on. In my opinion, as I, if I may say so, I think that here was a very strong point regarding the empathy and the support of the Romanian woman towards the situation of the Ukrainian women in the first part and now also when the war started. And this trend towards neutrality, as I specified before, had a much more stronger impact on the women because they didn't want to be in the same situation as the Ukrainian women, and actually they didn't and they don't want the war anymore to be happening in their proximity and in their lives. And also the economical burdens, the financial burdens of a family usually is taken and solved somehow by those women in Romania, in rural area. And as I told you, this is only a speculation. Probably those women, some of them are those that are working in other states of European Union and that have a certain, let's say, instability actually with what is happening back home.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alina, for this very interesting analysis. Now, moving on to you, Jakub. What do the results tell us about Norwegian attachment towards Euro-Atlantic institutions?
Thank you very much. According to the original plan, I have 4 minutes to cover the issues that we have tried to map when conducting this public opinion survey in Norway. I can sum up the main findings, also placing them in a broader context. Is that Norway, as one of the founding fathers of NATO, is very strongly for NATO's further existence, and for Norway being still a very constructive member of NATO. We delegated one of our leading politicians, Jens Stoltenberg, to be the head of NATO in this difficult period, and we see that he has been doing a very good job, and this was maybe the main Norwegian contribution to keeping NATO together through the period of Donald Trump presidency. So this is still very much the name of the game. Norway is a trustful member of NATO. Concerning relationship to the European Union, we have some more complicated relationship because Norway rejected membership in the European Union twice. We are affiliated with the European Union through this EEA agreement that opens for many areas of cooperation, but we are not engaged in policy making because we are not at the decision-making table. And concerning the vulnerabilities of the Norwegian society, we need to understand that the Norwegian society is quite often characterized as a high-trust society. There is a very high level of trust in human relations, but also in state institutions, and this also somehow informs how the Norwegian population is approaching those questions related to fake news and disinformation. There is very high level of literacy in Norway, information literacy, and the Norwegian society is rather able to resist those pressures coming from the international, from the information sphere. So those would be my very short remarks on the findings of the public opinion poll. there have been some groups that show less interest in dealing with those questions, but we don't have time to dig into those questions. Those who are interested can always go to the report that we are about to publish, where more details can be found.
Thank you, Jakub. You are talking about trust within Norwegian society, and I wanted to ask you, Alina, how is this reflecting the Romanian society regarding various sources of information out there?
Sources of disinformation. I don't know if you, yes, you can hear me. Actually, there are also some interesting issues regarding the results, because we have like 67% of the Romanian population that recognize that we are the victims of disinformation and fake news. And also like 56% recognize that mass media generally is the main responsible. When we go to look into the mass media, what are the sources of information for this kind of disinformation recognition and fake news, we found out that the news television actually are the main source of disinformation, as the Romanian citizen indicated. On the other hand, the youngsters, and now I return back to 18 to 20 to 25 to 29 profile, they are indicating social media platforms. All types of social media platforms, of course, accordingly to their profile. Most of them Instagram, TikTok, and so on. But in the same time, there are also 67% of the population that said that television is not, and news television is not a source to be trusted, but actually they consume it. They go there, especially people over 60 years old. And when we go back to see what type of opinion they have regarding the war, we met a percentage of 13%, especially the youngsters, that are not interested anymore in subjects regarding the war in Ukraine. This is another level where we saw this type of war fatigue about what is happening in Ukraine and in the proximity. And when we go to the responsible, let's say, stakeholders that should tackle this disinformation that are aware of, 80% of the public opinion level current, they said that they do not check and do not have media literacy basic skills of checking the information or fact checking. And back to the last issue, they consider, and this is also, let's say, like a mental frame towards patriarchal and authoritarian perspective, and you will see the differences in the Norwegia. Like 44% of the Romanians consider that the state should take the right measures against disinformation and fake news. If you were also attentive with what Alina BÂRGâOANU said earlier, this is those results can be correlated and give us a very deep, actually, impact about the position of the Romanians, especially when the next year we'll have elections.
Okay, thank you, Lana. We are running out of time, and lunch is, fortunately for some, right around the corner. I just wanted a couple of words on what does the survey tell us about attitudes towards the war in Ukraine in a couple of words. Can we say that the societies are pessimistic, fearful, or optimistic towards the outcome of the war? And I will start with you, Jakub.
There is an overwhelming understanding that the war in Ukraine is caused by Russian policy towards Ukraine. There are some meaning that NATO could also act in a wiser way prior to the outbreak of the war, but there is a kind of more or less public consensus that Russia is the main actor to be blamed for the war, and there is also a very high level of support of any type of help that Ukraine can get from Norway and from the West to put an end to the war, and there is no appetite in Norway to give any territorial concessions to Russia. This would be, in very short, the main lines of the public mood in Norway for the time being.
Well, it's good to hear about consensus in a world which is ever more polarized. Elena, on to some closing remarks.
The closing remarks is that still we have to be very careful with those warnings that we have been talking about, this polarization that is very easily to be observed. And on the main, let's say, conclusion, let's be optimistic, because still we have the results that indicate Russia as responsible and bears the guilt of starting a war in Europe. It's still a strong trend in the public opinion suggesting that. And the second one, a good percentage, for example, for the Romania, like over 60%, that agrees that Russia should retire and surrender the occupied territory or give back this occupied territory to the Ukrainian people.
Thank you, and thank you all for choosing us over lunch. That's it, I guess. Bon appetit.
Protecting what matters most is the mission that matters most. At Lockheed Martin, we understand